Hi, I'm Duncan Munro, and you're listening to The Halftone Effect.
Welcome to another adventure of the Halftone Effect.
Save us!
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another issue of the Halftone Effect. Today I am joined by a very special guest, Duncan Munro. Duncan, thank you for joining into the podcast tonight.
Kieran, thanks very much for having me.
That's an absolute delight. You are a very busy guy. Have written some fantastic scripts for Phantom Comics. You are an actor as well. You've had some cameos in film and TV, which is exciting. But we're going to dive into it first, a little bit about your backstory in the comic book world, your origin story, where it started for you. What got you involved in the comic book world? What was your first comic that you picked up and inspired you?
For those who came in late, I am a fan, as I'm sure we'll get to, but it wasn't actually where I started. Comic books were very much how I learnt to read as a kid, mostly because my parents were separated when I was young, and used to spend a lot of time in the car going backwards and forwards between their houses. And usually Dad would ply me with comic books to keep me quiet in the back seat. I had a tendency to ask questions and talk a lot, which hasn't gone away. And I just got lost in this world of these comic books that had started off belonging to my brothers and being left around the house when I was a child. A pacifier for keeping me in the back seat, trying to keep me quiet on long car trips. And it grew into what could only be called as an obsession as an adult.
Yes, and that's the thing. It carries over from that childhood. I don't know anyone that read comic books that in my circle of friends that don't read them still. It becomes an obsession, a healthy obsession, I like to think of it.
And fortunately, the world has caught up, where we seem to be in a golden age of people appreciating those the morality tales that come out of those heroes.
Yes.
So we're seeing a bit of a renaissance in an appreciation for some of the earlier work, and then modern interpretations of all those characters we grew up with.
Absolutely, and it's great to see. I know that the idea of comic books, in our lifetime has been about the books themselves. And I know the next generation, it's about the movies, but there always will be that foundation for the stories in the books. And I know for me personally, I always prefer going back to the books and reading. As much as I love watching the movies, the books are where it started and where it inspired, a multitude of people to want to create their own stories and want to work on other people's stories.
And I agree, and I'm the same. And I'm curious to see, because in our lifetime we'll see what the next evolution is for these characters and these stories. The recent DC fandom event, DC were talking about some of the avenues that they're going down in interactive storytelling. And in the example they gave was something like you might start off watching a Batman movie, but then get given something on an app or a Comixology type thing to read, to get the history or to get the background on a character. And then you go back to whatever you're doing in your normal life outside the story, and then you get an alert on your smartwatch telling you that Batman is calling you back to action. And it might be 6, 8, 24 hours later. And then you go back into the story again. And they're already starting to do it with Young Justice, where you're seeing the point of view of some of the characters, and you're getting a bit of a head-up display of a helmet or a visor or glasses that they're wearing that's giving them a feed from some AI on who the characters are. So the exposition is actually coming from the viewer watching the experience and learning as they're watching the story.
Yeah.
And that seems fascinating to me, and I'm looking forward to see where that evolution goes.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch it evolve. I still I was fighting it when it started, the transition from comic book monthly pages to the tablets. I was fighting that, and I think this is like 2013 when it really started to take that that plunge into it for me personally, and I fought it. And then I saw a friend was reading it on a television screen, and you get to absorb that detail from the artist has created this beautiful landscape of work, and it's like, okay, I understand why. To this day, I'll still fight it that there's nothing better than holding a comic in your hands and reading it now. I'm the same. I read comics as a child, and in the back pocket, sitting under a tree, sitting in a classroom, reading a comic book. Nothing beats that. And I'm still doing it to this day. I've got a pull list, and I get my monthly comics sent to me. But it's definitely something that has changed the medium going digital and going forward. It definitely is that case. There'll be new ways of doing it. I know that Marvel back in the early 2000s, they were trying the whole digital format within like a TV series. So they did the Black Panther and all that kind of stuff, and that took off for them. And I don't think it went on as well as it did later on, but it was still another way to get that audience involved in it. And it was cool to watch those kind of motion. I can't remember the actual name for them, but
I think you're right.
The motion comics, and that was cool. So there's definitely. They're definitely obviously thinking of new ways of doing it. And with the DC fandom event, I think that was the next step for how they can really market to their audience.
And I think it's not just comics; it's publishing in general. And I'm a big reader of fiction and non-fiction books as well. And it's the same thing. Just like comic books, there are some stories I just want to go on holidays. Yep. Sit on a bench and be holding a book in my hand and turning the pages to find out what happens next, as opposed to flicking on the tablet.
Yeah.
And I think it's with comic books, it is a very different experience, and the art is part of it, because the software behind a lot of those tablet based viewing apps. Is amazing in how it knows where to draw your eye on the page, but when you're scanning through it, and it almost becomes it is a different experience, but I don't think it'll ever fully replace the experience of seeing those full splash pages as you turn a page, and the line work that goes into each panel, and then what they look like all together on a page, because as you know, artists spend a lot of time looking at that black and white script and choosing how to bring it to life, and finding at least one panel every page that is really going to draw the eye. I'm a big, as a collector, I'm a big lover of the actual physical comic book, and big supporter of the local comic book stores. And in this year has certainly been a challenge globally for how we consume our comic book stories, and it's really been challenging for some of the companies that are producing the stuff, the creators that are coming up with the ideas and bringing their ideas to us, and the retailers that are trying to make it so that it's accessible for us. And I really think it's going to be interesting as we continue into 2021 to see what lessons are learned and what is enduring out of this COVID period in ongoing.
Yeah, look, it's funny speaking to the people who have come on the podcast this year. They've all experienced the trials and the tests that they've put them through, with obviously having no conventions as well. And they've found that they've fallen back onto whether it be crowdfunding or getting their books into a store. It has been the ideal way to push forward in a COVID world. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Going forward, it'll be interesting to see how the market changes. It definitely won't decimate the industry, but it has to evolve from here. And definitely, like, the virtual conventions that have been happening over the last couple of months have been very interesting to watch. I've took part in one recently, and it definitely is a different way of doing it. But it's definitely another way of getting yourself out there and getting amongst it, I guess, without the satisfaction of being able to talk to your audience live at a convention and getting the buzz of what it is to do the convention circuit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the fans, the community is important with those events, and the virtual events have been a reasonable placeholder but not a replacement.
No.
And you've seen with how they've adapted with some of the use of apps like Discord and things like that, where they're trying to unite those communities in addition to those events or in parallel to those events, so that they've got someone to talk about the latest news with, or they can have those touch points. And I think that's important from a welfare perspective, for what is a very diverse and large community that has made that convention scene part of their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is definitely interesting the way it's all going, and I look forward to. I actually look forward to how it's all going to change, with the way we do things, and it can be a scary notion, and I think it's something we've got to deal with it, and it's exciting. I think it's great. It's a new way of doing things. Diving back to your origins, what were the comics that you were reading? I'm really intrigued by what were you reading at the time that got you into it?
When I first started reading, the comics that were around Dad's place were a lot of the US stuff, so the Whitman, and this is when I'm just learning to read 5, 6, 7 sort of thing.
Yeah.
Was the Disney stuff and Bugs Bunny and Richie Rich and Archie, and Archie stayed. And I still have quite a fondness for that, and I would seek them out. So that graduated into building my own collection, because I exhausted the 6 comic books at Dad's place. And he's being voracious with this hunger for finding out more of these adventures in these flimsy little pages. And I would go to secondhand bookstores and op shops, and there used to be there used to be a thing called book exchanges where you could finish your book, your hard copy book, and you would go in and get partial value on that book to buy another book. And there was always a box under the desk somewhere that had some comic books in there. And obviously, being from Melbourne, the Melbourne show bag always had the Sly Phantom comic in it. But my first Phantom comic came from, and it was quite late, probably at the time when I should start to be transitioning from comic books. Dad, we stopped at the Nagambie general store on the shores there of Lake Nagambie, and there was no Archie and no Richie Rich and nothing else. And I didn't used to like Batman or Superman. I kind of got bored with the sciencey sort of stories. The Phantom was in black and white, and the only thing that they had was a Phantom comic. And Dad bought it for me out of desperation, and I read it in the car under sufferance, and started collecting basically from then. That was I started hunting in those secondhand bookshops for Phantom comics.
Yeah, wow.
As a teenager, I knew where all of the secondhand bookshops and op shops and everything were in my area, and I knew far more than is healthy to know as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, the days that they brought the new stuff into the op shops. And I had a program, and I would ride my bike around to the op shops and look to see if there was any, to cherry pick what had shown up in the comic section.
That's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think I've done that a couple of times. I've gone into an op shop just randomly, and there's been comic books sitting there, and you kind of just throw yourself at them. And like, I need to know what's here. There's any gems in between them, and as a grown man, still doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, this was. I used to plan it out. I planned my week out, so I knew when the ladies that volunteered in the op shop were going to be bringing new stuff out, and I'd swamped them.
That's just clever. That's just I put that down to clever hunting.
And we didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, and so the other way that I devoured comic books was I'd go to the paper shop, like the newsagents, and read in the store, and to not incur the wrath of the paper shop owner, I had a plot of all the newsagents that were in riding distance of my house, and I would read 2 or 3 pages at one, put it back, get on the bike, ride to the next one, find that issue, read the next part of the story, so that I wasn't spoiling the friendship with the paper
Very
shop
clever,
owner.
Duncan. That's very clever. I like that. There's genius in there. That's and I mean that's the thing. Like growing up, I grew up in a rural town, and the exposure that I had was Phantom, Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, and they were at your local news agents, and you'd get them monthly or bi-monthly as they come in, and you would go in and you'd do that. You'd do exactly that. Stand there and read a few pages every now and again just to get your fix if you couldn't afford them. And I mean, I think that's a great thing. A lot of kids that have grown up have come up through that cycle of the newspaper, the newsagents having them in the store. It's been an outlet for them to get involved with it, and then the comic book stores have come into it at a later date, and that's kind of where it goes out of control. For me personally, it did.
And that's why I think Frew, that produces the Phantom in Australia, have recently struck a deal to have Phantom comics available in Coles supermarkets where the periodicals are, and I think that's a great opportunity for young readers to try the Phantom out and read a few pages while Mum's doing the shopping or Dad's doing the shopping, and slip it into the cart on the way out so they can read the ending. So,
yeah, I recently saw that. It was very interesting to note that, because it's been a long time since there's been a comic book in a supermarket in Australia. I mean, but to see them actually now stocked there, it seems it's a big deal to have a comic book available so easily accessible in all the Coles around Australia.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's taking comics back to their origins in the general stores and the drugstores where they came from in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah. It's very exciting, Duncan. It's great to hear. I always enjoy starting off with this in the podcast and talking to everyone that comes on about how they got involved in it, because I think this backstory to why we do what we do is just as important as the work we put out there, because there's a passion behind everything that we do in the comic book world, whether it be writing for a friend, a company, your own work. It truly does make the creator that much more interesting, and it makes the project more excitable. So it's very interesting to hear that. And I always do enjoy getting the origin story of everyone that comes on. Now, where to from there? Because the whole idea, like, of reading the comics, did it stir inside you that you wanted to become a writer, or you wanted to do your own stuff? Where did this kind of span out for you?
I think it graduated into, because most comic heroes and comic stories are essentially morality tales. So there's teachable points in the stories, usually about being virtuous or having good values in the face of significant conflict, and I think that's why I became more drawn to some of the more superhero type characters like Batman and Superman and the Punisher and the Phantom, as I was sort of entering my teen years with all that teen angst, and you're trying to figure out who you are and what the world is, because my values were very important to me. And so, and I think that continued into my adulthood, that there's this comfort that came from reading those stories, balanced out any conflict that I was experiencing in my real life. And if I found that there was injustice, it was a reassurance that you could still find it in the pages of a comic book. And it influenced my choices in books that I read, and then films, because I graduated from comic books in the 80s into buddy cop films and action movies, Die Hard and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's where the passion for performing and acting came from, was because I would find what I read in the comic books or what I watched in the movies, and with my friends would be playing at those same adventures. Like we'd be heroes trying to defeat a villain, or teaming up together to try and go on a quest across the dad's backyard or whatever it was. And life became an extension of the adventure that we were reading about or watching on the screen. And I think the acting just came out of wanting to extend that pretending, and the other part is the frustrated storyteller in me, and so that evolved into a lust for travel, a wanderlust for wanting to go on experience things around the world, and writing was always an outlet for me, but something I never took any formal training in or anything for about 10 or 15 years as an adult. And then when I started to do some study around it and try to get a process together, it helped me get the ideas out of my head and not just be tapping away at the keyboard aimlessly. And one of the best bits of advice I got was from an author that I met who said, write a page a day. Doesn't matter what it is. Just write a page. And he goes, and at the end of the year, you'll have a book. And he was quite a prolific novel writer. I'm sure he did more than just write a page a day, and there was a lot more involved in his process. But it was good advice, because if you ever get stuck and you're not sure what to do, just writing about anything, about your day, about your thoughts, it's like exercising, and you get that feel back for formalizing and organizing your thoughts into something coherent that another person could understand.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a process. It's like anything you do, you eventually or gradually will become better at it. And I think that's important to any craft. You just continuously pursue it. If you love it and you have a passion for it, it's pretty quintessential that you need to be formulating where you're going with it, having a plan, and continuously pushing to get to that goal. Because the more you do it, the closer you are to achieving that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's interesting hearing you talk about, because the acting side of it, it's nothing we've really had it on the podcast before, but having that kind of outlet, it like you're saying, playing pretend, that is another way of kind of bringing your thoughts to life. Do you find that with how you build a script, does it really does it develop through that process?
As a writer or as a performer?
As both.
So, I think they're complementary with me. So, when I'm writing a script, I'll usually think of it like a scene, and I'll usually write a scene like it's a screenplay scene, like I'm watching a TV show or a film. And then, because the artist would hate that because there's no room for the art, you need to pare down to what's essential, and it's sort of it's on those second and third, fourth, 18th drafts that you're going through, and you're cutting away all of the gristle just to find the meat, and it's the same with performing, because most of the time you're doing another writer's story, and you're helping tell it, and there's a director who's also got their vision of what bringing that script to life means. But the writer has agonized over that script. Like Aaron Sorkin talks about, he wrote something like 40 drafts of A Few Good Men. And the product of all that hard work is there. But it's amazing writing. It's an incredible storytelling and a great characterization that he does. And that permeates through everything, all of his work. But as an actor, I'm very conscious of the compulsion for an actor, or the tendency to want to change the words because they know the character better. And I'm always thinking in my head, how could I know the character better than the guy or girl who wrote it? And so I look at the words to understand why they chose those words. And that helps to make a choice in how to portray that character. And And the same when I'm writing, I'll say the words out loud. Like I'll read a scene back after I've written it the next day and see if it sounds dumb. And if it doesn't sound like something that character would say. Because the reader is going to be doing that in their head. They're having this little play in their head of what the characters are doing.
Yep.
And,
yeah. Yep.
And with novel writing, I haven't anything published, but I've done a lot of essentially it's stuff for myself. But the dialogue in that, you can have you've got a bit more room to play with that because it's different from a screenplay or a comic book script, because you have the luxury of drawing somebody in or drawing the reader in to really understand the character's motivation a little more by choosing the words carefully to portray the scene the way you want it to play out in their head.
Yeah, right. So there's definitely the three different processes that all take their different ways in the formulation of what you're doing, by the sounds of what you've done with whether it be acting, writing a comic book story, or writing a novel. They are all very different, and from a perspective of talking about script for a comic and a script for a novel, yeah, I have heard that they're totally different mediums when it comes to writing out and kind of playing it out in your mind. And it's very interesting, like the process of it. I find it can be sometimes very daunting in how you are elaborating on what you're trying to speak through these characters, and the acting side of it. It's very interesting to hear you say that, because yeah, you do find yourself with that inner monologue, almost talking to yourself.
Yeah.
When you're crafting a character, or you're talking about a certain subject that the character is going on about. So it's very interesting to hear you say that, and the time, the process that we put into it, I don't think is really understood. That you're spending hours upon hours back and forth, whether you do two versions of the script or you do 40.
Yeah.
And I think that it depends on the writer and how comfortable they feel about that story and what they really are trying to put across to the reader. So yeah, it's very interesting to hear you say that, Duncan. I think it's a process which we all go through. It's a process that we have to go through. It does make us better writers at the end of the day. We have to do the revisions, and I don't know if you do it personally, but giving it out to people to read and see what they think before it's gone out into the world. Do you find that reflection from other people, it helps?
Yeah, absolutely. It's usually, what's hard is a lot of the time you're doing that with someone who's in your support group. And so what's important, I think, is to find somebody will be honest, even if it will have barbs in it, because you're showing them your work, which is a big deal for any creative person to show your work to somebody else, because you're petrified about them not liking it or whether they'll accept it or not. And that's the same whether it's a writer writing something, an artist painting something, a musician writing a song, or singing with their voice, or an actor doing their performance, because they've done all this work and they've made these choices, or they've poured their heart and soul into something, and there's a possibility that the other person's, it's not going to be interpreted or received the way you intended it to be sent out. And so I think it's important to have somebody who will be honest with you, even if it's not what you want to hear, because that's the only valuable critique you're going to get.
Yes.
And I've been fortunate in the editor at Frew, I think, feeling comfortable enough to be frank with me about things. And I've been paired with experienced artists who with comic books are part of their creative process who bring that experience to bear on my inexperience, and it have not just through the great art have elevated the story, but through their advice and counsel on the storytelling and the adjustments to the script. And it's hard to kill your darlings, as you'd be aware, but understanding the value of that criticism and how it can elevate the story is something that carries through between writing and performing, because it's the same thing. You'll come to an audition with a choice. The casting director will tell you to do something else to see if you can take direction, and then you'll be on set, and the thing that shows up on the screen isn't what you ached over for the 8 hours you had to prepare before you went into the casting room. It's a different. The characters changed, and the choices are completely different. And I just like with you performing, you want people that you trust, that you can show that stuff to. But yeah, absolutely, it's part of the process.
Yeah, look, and as long as you're talking about it just then with a group that you're experienced with, and you know they can give you the feedback. As long as it's constructive criticism, and it's not criticism or it's not critiquing that can tear you down, it's always important. I think that it doesn't achieve anything by knocking someone off their pedestal if they've written something and they've put their heart and soul into it, and just because you don't like it, you just tear it down. I think that's just it's very naysay, and constructive criticism. It's something I live by. I always believe that if you give constructive criticism, it'll come out a lot better for the creator if they know where they stand with you, but they also know where they can improve. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's the kind of the best support you can give someone if they've asked for some critiquing or some criticism in their work. I've had it. If you're saying you've had it before, it is important to the process of getting to create these characters and these worlds at the end of the day, and it really does help make them flourish, I guess, is the thing I'm trying to get across there. It really does help them flourish towards building a better world.
It's very easy to, as we're finding more and more in today's online world, it's very easy to destroy something. Elevating something is I think the challenge, and even someone who's starting out will benefit from something that is helping them improve or challenging how they're thinking, so that they grow and become better. And I've found that with the advice that I've been given by people a lot more talented and a lot more experienced than me.
Likewise, it helps. It all helps at the end of the day. That's what I believe. It does help you improve and become better at your craft.
Absolutely.
So with the Phantom, because this is your world, you've been working on. You've had 2 of your stories published through. And
That's
you've
right.
also been working on a few other stories whilst we've been in the the COVID lockdown.
Yeah.
Where did this come from? Where did this all start?
So I've been collecting Phantom comics since that day at the Ngambie General Store, and I've always I tried as a teenager to draw and failed miserably, but had an affinity for writing and a passion for it, if not the talent. And so I've always had that as an outlet. I've written Phantom stories before, and I'd written Phantom scripts before, but really not much more than fan fiction. They were for me as following that author's advice of write a page a day. And so it was just me using a character I know, to practice my writing muscle. And but I had an idea that I turned into a script that I wanted to submit to Frew, who are the publishers for the Phantom in Australia and have been for 80 years. And I said, and I mentioned it to a a friend of mine who I think you may know, Sammy J, the well-renowned comedian from Melbourne,
Yes.
who's currently
Yep.
on ABC Radio.
Yep.
For those of you listeners who aren't aware, Sam was a student at the Peninsula School where I was a gardener when I was in my early 20s, and he was in his teens, and we were the only two people at the school that read The Phantom. I had a Phantom baseball cap on that I used to wear when I was gardening around the school, and he struck up a conversation with me because I was wearing that. And this was at the height of The Phantom in Australia with the 1996 Billy Zane movie.
Wow. Okay. Yep.
And so at the height of its zenith in Australia, in the last 40 years or whatever, only two people at this in our circles both read The Phantom, and we used to talk over that. Years later, and for those who want the full story, they'll have to wait till Sammy reprises his 2016, I think it was, award-winning sellout show Hero Complex. But basically, where he tells the story of his lifelong fascination with Australian politics, the Phantom, and the intertwined connection he's got with his school gardener. And that show was called Hero Complex. And Sam issued me with the challenge to show up at one. I feature quite heavily in the show, and I'm pretty sure you've seen it. And he's assured me that it will be reprised at some point. But so for your listeners that are unfortunate enough not to have enjoyed Sam's talents in that area, watch out for that, and check out Sammy J on ABC Radio and his live shows, because he's absolutely fantastic. And he does a show every week on ABC called Playground Politics. But the show quite heavily features where I've shown up in his life over the preceding 20 years from when we first met, 20 or so years, and he challenged me to show up at one show in each capital city, which I did, because he went all around Australia with it. And when we were in Sydney, we went out for lunch before the show, and I told him how I'd written a Phantom story and I was too nervous to show it to the Frew people. And then that night I'd organised because it was so heavily featuring the Phantom, I'd organised for some of the Phantom artists that I'd grown up and Sam had grown up enjoying their work that lived in Sydney to see the show, and the owners, the editor and the publisher from Frew Publications to be in the audience. And after the show, they all came out to the bar at the venue and invited Sam and I to see the Frew headquarters the next day where they make the comic book. And it's far from getting a guided tour by Dan DiDio of the DC headquarters. Nonetheless, it was the zenith of our fandom to show up at the offices there in Sydney. And it was a new offices. Sam had gone as a teenager, had made the pilgrimage and gone to the old Castlereagh Street Sydney offices, and we show up and we got a guided tour, completely nerded out over all the things that were in there, and Sam brought up Duncan's written a script, and I kind of gave him death stares across the room, and then they said, "Oh well, we're interested in finding Australian talent, so send it in to us." And so, too nervous to give them the one that I'd done, I went home and wrote a new script. The story was basically a tribute to my friendship with Sam, and it was called Hero Complex. And Sam was one of the characters in it. It was his likeness. And in the origins of our friendship, when the film had come out, we kind of had we bonded over the comic books and over the Phantom, and we kind of jokingly said that he was Rex, which is the Phantom's ward, and I was the Phantom because I was slightly older. And he's always a skinny little kid, and despite the fact that he's quite famous now, he's still a skinny little kid. He's still 78 kilos, wringing wet. So And so the story is about Rex and the Phantom, and how their relationship with each other changes, where it starts off with the Phantom being finding Rex in the jungle and raising him as his ward. Rex I didn't make this bit up. Rex subsequently becomes the prince of his own kingdom. They find out that he's of royal lineage, and he takes over that kingdom. And this story is the Phantom going back to check on Rex, and seeing how much of a leader and a hero that Rex has become. And so their positions have kind of reversed. And that story was my tribute to my friendship with Sam and my payback to him for the honour that it was that he had written this comedy show that featured our friendship so heavily. And so I gave them that script and then heard nothing for about a year. And Sam subsequently had finished one of the last Hero Complex shows that he did was one of the last capital cities I had to go to was Hobart. He had just had his first young adult fiction book, The Long Class Good Night. Long Class Good Night, published, and he gave me a copy of his book as a gift when I saw him. And I'd taken, because I felt like it was never going to get published, so I'd had the script for Hero Complex bound and signed and dedicated to him and gave him that. And we took a photo and he sent it to the editor from Through Publications and said, "This is Duncan standing with my published book and me standing with his unpublished script. What do we need to do to make this, to remove the un?" And the next day they wrote back to both of us and said, "We forgot all about it. It's under a desk somewhere.
No.
We'll read it tonight." And so they read it, and the next day they sent us both an email and said, "We love it. You can remove the un. We just need to find an artist." And so I'm eternally grateful to Sam for his friendship and his support. Hashtag listen to ABC Melbourne in the morning. And so subsequent to that, the editor found Jeff Weigel, who is one of the Phantom artists for the Sunday strip that gets published in newspapers all over the world. It's the official canon story from King Features. And there's two. Mike Manley does the dailies, and Jeff Weigel does the Sundays. And he's an incredible artist and a very experienced storyteller and a great guy. And so for my debut as a published author, it was on my favourite character with one of my favourite artists doing the work. And, going back to what we said before, he absolutely elevated that story to with his artwork and his fine touch on the script. It absolutely blows me away every time I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and he knocks it out of the park. I've got both the most recent one, Held to Account, and the Hero Complex, and like he just smashes it out of the park. I didn't realize that he had done the Sunday strips as well. So that itself is like, okay, that's kind of a game changer. Because I usually occasionally look at them when I see a paper floating around, whether it be at work or at a friend's house. But yeah, I mean, to have that kind of, ability to be able to have your script published, but also to have someone that you look up to illustrate it, that's something else entirely. I mean, the buzz that comes off that. And I remember seeing you at the Sydney Supernova show because I was tabling across from Jeff, and the buzz that was going on that day, and you had the biggest grin on your face, and we'd only just met, but you just seemed to be in your absolute element, and that's what comics are about. That's you enjoy them as much as you create them and read them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it was incredible to see. Because Jeff was very approachable, and I know a lot of the Phantom fans in Australia and a lot of people that were there at Supernova had come from all around Australia to go to that Supernova because Jeff was there. And he's very approachable, very passionate creator, and really gave a lot of his time and was willing to talk about his process and his history. There's a annual dinner that they have for Phantom collectors called the Lee Falk Memorial Bengali Explorers Club dinner. Unfortunately, they didn't have it this year due to COVID, but it's been going for 30-something years, I think. And a tremendous amount of work goes into organising it, but they'll try and get the guest of the dinner to be a Phantom creator from somewhere. And that year, the Phantom, the guest for the dinner was Jeff, and he gave this fantastic speech, which is available online. And in it, he talks about his origin story, to use your term, and in it he gives this. He talks about his connection to storytelling and comics, and he talks about how he came into being the custodian of the Phantom Daily art, the Daily strip, along with Tony DePaul, who's the writer for both the Daily and the Sunday. And he knew his audience. He knew he was in a room of passionate Phantom fans that had come from. There were people from overseas at the dinner, and he said, "I understand that the character's not mine." And he said, "I've only got it for a little while," and he said, "And I promise to be careful with it, and I promise to not break your train set." And grown men in the room were almost crying at the authenticity with which he spoke, because they believed him, and he's shown it in the work that he puts into the strip and the comics that he's illustrated.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. I mean, there are very few people that get to play with those toys, and you have been able to get to match your story with one of the greats in the Phantom comics. That's something else. That's something to really get excited about.
It is absolutely insane.
Yeah, and it's like for people that start and get work on their stories for so long, and then kind of just it falls into place like that. That's something that's just it's unbelievable almost. You have to pinch yourself to really realize it.
Yeah, I still haven't woken up that it's actually happened. So the first 3 stories, the third part of the stories that you mentioned before, Rotten Apples, is due to come out next year, and that's the conclusion of that 3-part story. And Jeff's done the art for that. We're just waiting for the publication date. And the other stories that you mentioned haven't. Some of them are still pending approval from King Features, but the ones that have been approved, an Australian artist, Daniel Picciotto, has been assigned the art for at least the first one, and I am equally blown away because he is an incredibly talented guy who puts so much into the art that he does. And I was excited that he did the cover for Held to Account, which I think he knocked out of the park, and to find that he was doing the sequentials on one of my stories, the fan in me lost a bit of control. Like I can't wait to see it, and so it's already crazy enough to be part of my own collection, but to be part of my own collection with my work alongside people that I respect and admire so much is an absolute thrill.
Yeah, and it's great to see some of the up and coming Aussie talent being included into the fold. I mean, Jamie Johnson, Camilo Di Pietro, Matt Kime, just a few that have all had a chance to jump in and have a crack at this character. This character who's got a huge history in the footnote of comic books. I mean, it's a pretty big thing, and to have Australian talent working on this character, it's phenomenal. It's fantastic to see.
Absolutely, and it's great because the Phantom's such, despite being an American creation, it's got such a strong Australian connection that having people like Jamie and Matt, Jeremy McPherson, join the artists and creators that we're used to from the 80s and 90s, like Glenn Lumsden and Antonio Lemos and Glenn Ford. That's very much a push from the current Frou crew, the current owners, because it changed hands about 5 years ago. They actively went and found Australian talent to give them a platform, and have just found absolute gold with some of the people that they've picked up, like Jason Paulos and Daniel Picciotto,
Paul Manson,
like you said, Jackie, and just gone from strength to strength. And then it's giving the chance for some of the Phantom fans to follow that creator across to some of their own creator-owned properties, or the other licensed stuff that they're working on, broadening the audience of those things too, which I think is very important, and it's a great contribution to the Australian creative space that Frou is doing. But it's a global character, so I think Frou have also been actively courting artists from Europe and Scandinavia and South America and India, trying to get the local connection to the fan base there by incorporating their creators into the new stories that they're and covers that they're commissioning.
Yeah, it's exciting. I really get a buzz when I see a name that I know within the Australian community on a Phantom comic. It is cool to see, and it's exciting. It's very exciting to see those kind of talents being picked up and published in the mainstream industry like that. So it's very exciting. Where to next, Duncan? Like you've basically just knocked off a huge thing from your bucket list, but what's next? I mean, riding off this high.
Well, I took not to be dissuaded from having logical common sense get in the way of my aspirations. I took the story that I'd originally written, that I'd talked to Sammy J about at lunch, that Frou didn't like, because I subsequently tied it up and submitted it, and I turned that into a pilot for a screenplay pilot for a TV series, but the progress on that has been slow, partly because of me, because it's that I've been limited in who I've shown it to, and partly because I've been a little bit discouraged by the inquiries I've made with getting the permission to pitch it. But I've also been in the writing space, been doing other writing during COVID, including some creator-owned stuff, and to reaching out to some other creators about the sky's the limit. So I'm like, well, if I've already got the opportunity to work with Jeff Weigel, and Daniel's already doing the other work, who else do I want to see bring my stuff to life? And COVID's been a good opportunity for that, because it's been a positive out of the unfortunate cancellation of a lot of the live events and some of the changes in the industry, which has meant that some creators are more accessible than they would have been before. But yeah, and from the performing side, it's the end of the year has finished a little bit better than it's been during the year, because it's been quite challenging doing every audition via Zoom, and turning the lounge room into a studio to do your own self tapes. But equally have had some great opportunities to do things being cast overseas, that they sort of broadened their net a little bit because they could, because someone who was in LA was also sending them a tape from their lounge room. So I've got a lounge room, and so I was able to submit for roles that I might not otherwise have been in in the room for because it would have been too hard logistically.
Wow, that's an opportunity. I think that's kind of another positive to take away from a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we've taken up enough of your time this evening. It's been great having you on the show, Duncan. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing the journey that you've had into this world of comic books. But for anyone listening, where can they find you on the world of social media?
The main thing is I'm Duncan Munro on Facebook, Mr. Duncan Munro on Instagram, and put most of the things that I've got that are relevant that aren't pictures of my food on that. And the Phantom stories that I did for Frew are available through phantomcomic.com.au, and they're also available on Comixology, going back to the digital conversation we had before, and coming up in your Coles supermarkets.
There you go, guys. Go and check out Duncan's work. Go and pick it up from Frew or Comixology. Go and check him out on social media. It's important we follow our fans and we follow our readers and continue to support them so they can put out more great stories and more great artwork. Again, Duncan, thank you for joining in tonight. It's been a pleasure having you on board.
Thanks very much.
Talking about your story. Guys, thank you again for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this one. We'll be back again next week with the Halftone Effect.